The perfect hygiene team is not coming. When you wait for the perfect hygiene team, you're also waiting on everything else. If you hire a hygienist or two tomorrow, would every patient receive the same patient education? Would every provider diagnose perio the same way? I've seen practices, hire incredible people, like really talented people, thinking this person is it, right? They're the person that's going to fix everything. And 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, they're disappointed. Every practice owner knows exactly what payroll costs them, but it's a lot harder and very few could really get a tangible number for what inconsistency costs them, right? Staffing isn't something that we can always control, but the systems and the processes inside the practice absolutely are.
Welcome back to the Private Practice Playbook. We hear something from practice owners almost every week. As soon as I hire another hygienist, as soon as we're fully staffed, as soon as the payroll settles down, then we'll invest. But what if the biggest thing holding practices back isn't staffing? It's simply waiting. The reality is that many practices don't have a perfect hygiene team. They're piecing together schedules with one experienced hygienist, a couple part-time providers, and temporary coverage wherever they can find it. At the same time, payroll has increased, margins are tighter, and every investment feels more significant than ever. So it is understandable why many owners hesitate. But what if waiting is actually creating more inconsistency, more missed opportunity, and more frustration? Today, we're talking about why the strongest hygiene departments aren't built around perfect staffing. They're built around intentional systems that create consistency. Joining me today is Practice Growth Institute's clinical training manager, Jaclyn, who's worked inside practices across the country, helping teams improve patient care, create consistency, strengthen accountability, and build hygiene departments that continue to perform even when staffing changes. So if you've been waiting for the right team before making changes, this conversation is for you. Hi, Jaclyn. Thanks for being back with us today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Today's title is pretty bold and pretty direct. The perfect hygiene team isn't coming. So tell us what you mean by that.
I know. It's a little spicy, if you will. But honestly, after the last several years, it's the reality. I mean, every single week I'm talking with practice owners or going into offices who are saying some version of the same thing, right? So it's like we're still trying to hire. We've been looking for months. We've had ads out, we're not getting a response, or we have a great hygienist or had a great hygienist and they moved or cut back to 3 days. And we're like piecing together the schedule with temps. Our associate doctor's doing hygiene on Fridays. So, that really has become the normal today. So I've had the opportunity to go into more than 800 practices. And one thing that I've realized is that, the practices that are really doing well today aren't necessarily the ones with the best, staffing situation. It's not, hey, we've had this amazing hygiene team for, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. It's just the ones that stopped waiting because here's what happens when you wait for the perfect hygiene team, you're also waiting on everything else. You're waiting to improve patient communication. You're waiting to improve systems. You're waiting to bring in accountability, patient education. Everything just kind of halts in that holding pattern. And before you know it, a lot of time passes. So a year's gone by, 2 years have gone by, 3 years have gone by. So what I see is that, the practices growing today have just always they just decided we're going to keep one foot in front of the other. We're not waiting on anything. We're just going to keep moving forward. And what they have now is a team and a department that can perform really well with kind of whoever is on the lineup. So to me, that is a much more empowering way to think about it, because staffing isn't something that we can always control, but the systems and the processes inside the practice absolutely are.
Yeah, what you just described makes me think of the line like leap and the net will appear a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
instead
Yeah.
of having to have, everything right and in a line before you start working on optimizing the business on the inside, right?
Absolutely. 100%. Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
you mentioned you'd been in hundreds of practices across the country. So right now, what do you think that the average hygiene department actually looks like?
It looks a little different everywhere, you know. It depends on what part of the country you're in. It depends on, the type of practice, but there's definitely patterns. 5 or 10 years ago, it was not uncommon to walk into an office where the entire team was filled with full-time hygienists who had been there for at least a couple of years, if not more. I mean, I can remember one of the, not first trainings, but definitely in my first year of training, I can remember walking to an office and the entire team of hygienists, I think there were 6 or 7, they had all been there like decades. It's not that way anymore, at least not as often. Today it's one or two experienced seasoned hygienists who've been on the team for a long time. And then maybe it's a part-time hygienist. They've got temp hygienists filling in, to fill the gaps. Like I said, associate doctors are helping cover hygiene when needed, or owner doctors even. Everyone is kind of doing what they have to continue the patient care and make sure that patients are still being taken care of, and doing what they have to create space and accommodate like new patients getting on the schedule or existing patients getting back into hygiene. So I actually think that a lot of practice owners really probably need to hear that, because so many feel like they're the only ones and it's a problem that only they have. And it's just not. It is happening everywhere. Those patterns are in Florida, California, Oklahoma. I mean, everywhere that I go, every practice owner that I talk to, some of those pieces are just the same. So I think the conversation just has to change, instead of it being, how do we get back to the way things used to be, right? How do we get back there? I think it's like we got to start thinking about how do we build a hygiene department that performs well and that works in today's market, in today's environment. Because today's environment is kind of sticking around, and it's not going to be gone tomorrow. So we've got to figure out how to thrive in it.
Such a great point. I don't think it's unreasonable to want to have the right people in place. However, do you
Yeah.
think that some owners are waiting for this perfect, idealized version of their hygiene department that may never actually exist?
I do. Yeah, I really do, and I understand why. Like you said, I mean, it's fair to want to have, the right people, or, people that, you feel really good about, that you feel solid on. We all, I think, naturally think like, well, once this gets better, once this settles down, once this kind of
Mhm.
stabilizes, then I'll, do this or that. Once we're fully staffed, once we find those other two hygienists, then we'll train them. Once we get back here, we'll bring in, we'll bring back that accountability that we used to have, or we'll work on our systems and our processes and our communication. But, here's what I've noticed is that the stability doesn't usually come first. Again, you just have to kind of like, you just have to kind of go for it. You just got to kind of go for it. If you hire a hygienist or two tomorrow, would every patient, receive the same patient education? Would every provider diagnose perio the same way? Would every hygienist, communicate and present the options for treatment or recommendations with the same confidence? And if the answer is no, then hiring another hygienist, or kind of waiting for that, that full-time hygienist to come on board, it didn't really solve the problem, right? It just gave another person a system that still needs to be improved, right? That still could be better.
I'm hearing doctors say all the time, like you mentioned, as soon as we're fully staffed, as soon as we have this, as soon as there's another hygienist, as soon as things
Yep.
settle down, then we'll invest. And it's almost over planning to the point of it's almost like a subconscious way to not go into the next phase of growth because you're
Yeah.
worried about what that looks like. And it's a
Yeah.
way to like feel good about the procrastination, almost of be taking yourself to the next level. So, talk to us a little bit more about why that thinking is really dangerous.
As you were saying that, I'm just all I can think about is having kids, right? So it's like I can't tell you for like how many times for how many years I thought to myself, well, once this happens, right? Once, now's not the perfect time, maybe in the fall, maybe in the spring, maybe next year. And then, before you know it, I mean, really a lot of time passes and waiting has a cost, we just don't always see it in the moment. It never feels like the perfect time. And this is something that I've just seen become true over so many years in dentistry, is like there really is never a perfect time. Human capital is always a work in progress. Even once you feel like, oh, we've arrived, we've got the best team we ever have, you know things change. So again, we just don't always see it. A lot of times human nature is we just kind of, that waiting just kind of happens and we stay in that holding pattern, and it's neutral. We're not really losing anything by staying there, but it's
Mm.
not. I mean, every day that we wait, those inconsistencies are still happening. One person explains periodontal disease beautifully, and then another hygienist, barely mentions it. One always pre-appoints the patient and makes sure that they're set for that next visit before they leave, and another one doesn't. One really has a lot of confidence and builds the confidence of the patient and impacts them to say yes to recommendations in hygiene and on the doctor's side. So those little moments, they don't seem significant by themselves, but over days and weeks and hundreds and even thousands of patient visits, that turns into the culture of the hygiene department. And I think that's what we miss sometimes, and especially business owners miss sometimes, is that waiting pattern, that holding pattern. It isn't, preserving what you have. It really does allow inconsistency and kind of the complacency to just become more deeply rooted.
Yeah, it's like we have this fixed mindset and we're married to this plot line of, okay, the person is going to fix everything, not the system. So
Yes.
what happens then if
Yes.
we find that right person, but we put them into a broken system? Then what happens? Like that makes me think almost, okay, well, if I have the right person, we can scare them away if we don't have the right processes and the right systems in place.
Yes,
Would you agree
yes,
with
yes,
that?
yes. 1,000%. I mean, eventually, like the system wins, right? The broken system or the less than ideal system, it wins. And that's probably like the simplest way to put it. Great hygienists are still human. If expectations aren't clear, if every provider communicates differently, if there's not that like calibration, if there isn't accountability, if everyone has their own philosophy of care, their own standard of care, even a really amazing hygienist starts kind of adapting to the environment around them. And I've seen practices, hire incredible people, like really talented people, thinking this person is it, right? They're the person that's going to fix everything. And, 3, 4, 5, 6 months later, they're disappointed, not because that, hygienist wasn't talented, but it's because they expected one person to kind of overcome a whole system, a whole department that really wasn't supporting their success. So I don't think that it's fair to put that kind of burden on one team member.
Mhm.
The better question isn't, can this person kind of drive the department and save the department and move it in the right direction? It's, does our department, or like, is our department set up to help every hygienist be successful? Could any hygienist come in here and be successful? And that is just a totally different mindset, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes me think of like a quarterback on a football team. Like if we don't have the right receivers or running backs or skill players around him or even a coach calling the right plays that are built, they're not going to be effective in the offense, and
Yeah.
the offense isn't going to move forward. So the system has to be right for the talent too. Okay, so let's flip the situation though on the other side. I hire a average, okay, middle average hygienist and put them into an exceptional system. What can happen then?
This is actually one of my favorite things to watch, and I've gotten to see this happen a lot, right? I've seen it happen so many times when, someone walks into a practice and they're not the most experienced clinician. I mean, they have maybe very little clinical experience. They just graduated hygiene school a year ago or something, right? And so they're a little hesitant. They're not typically like as confident having difficult conversations, or they might be less comfortable recommending making their recommendations, or like teeing up the doctor for treatment recommendations and things. They're depending again on the practice, they might be really leaning into the insurance and letting insurance kind of guide the conversations and the treatment, recommendations and offerings. So if they walk into a department with really, clear expectations, clear standard of care, they hear how everyone communicates with patients. They understand the doctor's philosophy. They've got, systems that guide them. Then, if they actually have someone like coaching them and giving them feedback, they're really encouraged to keep improving and like rise to the occasion, instead of like just feeling like they're surviving every single day. Like, oh, thank God I got through today. Right. So, over time, something really kind of interesting happens. Their confidence grows, and all of a sudden their communication improves, patients respond differently, they begin to take a lot more ownership because they understand actually and get to see how much influence they actually have, not just on production, but on, on the patient's oral health, on the patient's trust. I think there's so many clinicians, not just hygienists, assistants included, that they don't realize how much patients look to them as the expert and how trusted they are. Assistants and hygienists are more trusted than the doctor in practices. They are so critical in gaining the patient's trust and getting their confidence. They're so critical in patient retention. They impact really whether or not that patient decides that it's worthwhile to continue to come back to the practice and become loyal to that practice. So that is one of the things that I just love the most about training, is that it's not about, creating robots that just everyone says the exact same thing and they read it off of a piece of a paper, but it's helping everyone really calibrate, right? It's getting everyone on the same page, helping them deliver that same standard of care while adding their own like personality and flair to it. So what you're really building is a department where success doesn't depend on like one or two rock stars. It
Mm.
depends on clear expectations. It depends on, shared philosophy, behaviors, accountability, and solid systems that help every single person succeed. So I think that's one of the greatest things that you can give to a team. Even for temp hygienists that come in, they really enjoy walking into a practice where things are tight like that. They're like, wow, this office has this together. They go into so many offices. I can't tell you how many times I've heard them walk into an office that has really solid, structure in place. And that's the office that they try and go back to. That's the office that they're looking for an opportunity to become full-time or part-time. So it's those systems that really are like your secret sauce.
I love that. So, what I'm hearing you say over and over again is that it's almost a mindset shift that the doctor needs to have, is to not have the perfect person come in and save, I don't want to say sinking ship, but
I
kind of,
know.
right? Like
Yeah.
save the boat, be responsible and have all of that responsibility on their shoulders. But it's more so, how do we create an environment to where we can put someone in who is coachable, who does want to rise to our systems and our expectations and our processes, and have them thrive there, instead of putting all of that responsibility on just one person to save something that's completely unstructured
Yeah,
almost.
yeah. I mean, that's a lot of pressure, and that's a lot of like a lot of faith, I guess, a lot of eggs in one basket that you're putting on one person being able to accomplish all of that. Whereas, if you take the kind of reverse approach, it's almost like build it and they will come, right? So, you have to really set things up for success so that anybody can plug in and, and do a great job.
I love that. And not to go woo-woo, but I think that you'll even attract different people to
Yes.
actually come to the practice anyway, to want to be in business with you, right?
Yeah.
When you already rise to that level.
Definitely.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Word travels fast, word travels fast. And like I said, between temps or interviews, I
Mhm.
mean, when they walk in and they see and feel and hear some of those things, when they're able to see that you have, training manuals, you've got written standards of care, it's not all gray and not all at the discretion of each person. That's a standout thing to be able to offer. That definitely gives them confidence that they want to become a part of that team. They're walking into the right place.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they're vetting the practices too, right? It's an interview both ways.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest misconception is that owners have about today's hygiene departments? What do they get wrong, or do they think that everyone else is doing it a particular way and they're just alone in the boat?
No, I mean, I think over the past couple of years, most practice owners, there are some that feel like because of their location or the type of practice that, they have it a little harder than other practices. But, the human capital challenge is real. And I think they know that they're not the only ones that are struggling to, find great people. But I think that the biggest misconception is that that's their biggest problem. It's because we can't find, right, the perfect combination of hygienists, or we can only find a part-time hygienist, not a full-time hygienist. That's our problem. That's why we can't, grow and thrive. And that's just not the case. Again, staffing is a challenge that everyone is having. Everyone can see that. But, it's those systems that are usually that kind of hidden opportunity that not everyone sees. So, again, something I've learned over time of going into so many offices is that two practices can have almost identical staffing situations and produce completely, different results. The difference really doesn't come down to the talent in a lot of cases. It's how intentionally that department has been built. Again, have they kept moving and just created and moved towards the goals that they want to see happen? They're not leaving all of those things to chance. They're not leaving patient education to chance. They're not leaving communication to chance. They're not leaving, diagnosing, preheating to chance. They're making a decision to be intentional about those things, regardless if they feel like it's the perfect time with the perfect team. So I think that's a huge misconception that I see happening a lot in offices.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's say I'm a doctor, I'm listening right now. I'm a practice owner and I'm like, Jaclyn, okay, I get it. I'm picking up what you're putting down. I understand that it's more important to work on the systems and the structures and the processes first and then, attract the right team. But I'm having a cash flow issue. So let's talk about finances and the logistics of that. Payroll has increased, margins are tighter than ever. Every investment feels a little more, I don't know, nerve-wracking. So many owners, think that they can justify or they can't justify investing in training or coaching right now because of all those things. What would you say to them?
First, I would tell them they're not alone. They're not alone. They're thinking about the right things. They're asking the right questions. They should be thoughtful, right? It's an investment. So it should be taken seriously and they should be thoughtful about it. But again, they're not alone. This isn't an environment where anyone is wanting to just spend money, frivolously or carelessly. But then I also ask a different question of, you're already making one of the largest payroll investments in your practice. So, how are you protecting that investment? Because payroll alone doesn't create results, right? Those people in those spots don't create results. They have to have tools to do that. And so people perform best when they have clear expectations, when they feel confident, when they have systems and support. So, one thing that I think we've unintentionally done in dentistry is assume that clinical ability automatically translates into case acceptance, right? Into results. And it doesn't. Being an excellent, really talented clinician doesn't automatically mean that someone is comfortable having those hard conversations, telling a patient that they have periodontal disease and that they're going to need to come back for multiple visits, or invest more than they initially thought they were going to need to. Not every really great clinician is great about, creating value around their preventive care visits or helping patients, really understand why they need treatment that's beyond what their insurance covers. Those are often like learned skills. So the good news is I've seen that they can absolutely be developed, when teams communicate more confidently and more consistently, when the patient hears one voice, they do understand, they see value. And when patients understand and when they see value, they're able to make better decisions. So it's better for the patient, it's better for the practice. And honestly, as a hygienist myself, it's more fulfilling because you feel like you're actually making an impact instead of just, moving from, okay, this patient to this patient to this patient. So I would challenge practice owners not to think about training as another expense. I think about it as helping their practice maximize one of the biggest investments that they're already making every single payroll.
Wow. That was just a huge light bulb moment for me, and I hope for everyone else listening too, that just because someone is a brilliant clinician or provider doesn't necessarily mean that they're great at articulating the value and explaining and being able
Hmm.
to, I mean, for a lack of a better word, sell the treatment that the patient needs, right?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, those are learned skills. And someone who might be great at that might not be a great clinician. So it's just
Mhm.
not everyone has all of the strengths. We have to learn them as we go. So such an important point that you just made. I
Yes.
love that. Still wondering if your hygiene department is built to withstand change? If your best hygienist gave notice tomorrow, would your hygiene department continue performing at the same level? Or would production, patient care, and consistency walk right out the door with them? At the Practice Growth Institute, we help you answer that question. Schedule a hygiene analysis, and our team will review your hygiene metrics, identify your biggest opportunities, and help you determine which systems will have the greatest impact on your practice. Whether that's establishing or refining your standard of care, improving periodontal diagnosis and case acceptance, increasing patient retention while keeping the schedule full, strengthening patient communication, or creating greater consistency across every provider, we'll help you build a customized plan for a more resilient, high-performing hygiene department. So if you're wondering whether your hygiene department is truly resilient, or if you've been waiting for the perfect team before investing in growth, don't wait. Call or text us today at 314-887-4259 or email at hygieneanalysis@mypgi.com to schedule your hygiene analysis. Because people will change, but your standards shouldn't. Another concern that we hear all the time is, okay, I finally have one or two great hygienists in place, but I don't want to introduce accountability. I don't want to rock the boat. I just want to keep everything, kind of as it is. What would you say to that doctor who might say that to you?
I know, and it's something, it's again, it's something I hear often. I mean, they're not the only ones thinking that. You just can't wait. People like accountability, right? And I think accountability, the word itself gets a bad rap. It sounds like scary sometimes, or it sounds like a
Mm.
bad word. But, if there's a feedback loop, and again, if that's the culture that's been built and created that team members step into, it's a good thing that people want, right? So without it, it creates a lot of confusion. It creates like different standards and different expectations. And ultimately, it ends up creating an environment that people don't want to stay in. You can't wait to bring accountability into the practice because you are, afraid that it's going to make your hygienist unhappy, right? You just can't.
Yeah, or scare someone away because the right person is going to be motivated and like almost like turned on by that. They're like, yes, I want to have goals. I want to, rise to these expectations. That's
Yeah.
actually the right person, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, some doctors might say next then, well, why would I train someone if they're going to leave? Everybody leaves anyway, so why would I invest in someone who's not going to be with me for the long haul?
So you can look at it two ways, right? It is a real question, and people do leave, right?
Mhm.
It really happens. People do leave. That's the cost of doing business. But here's the way I look at it. If your training only benefits one team member, then it probably wasn't designed correctly. The goal isn't to develop that person. Like, yes, we want to develop that person, but that's not the sole goal, right? The goal is to develop a system, right? So, yes, I want every hygienist on the team to grow, and they do. That is the personal development, professional development for them. I want them to be more confident. They will communicate more effectively. They will take more ownership. But what we're really building is, again, the system, the shared expectations, the behaviors, the processes, that written standard of care that we, hold ourselves to. And those things stay in place, right? Those things don't walk out the door when a team member leaves. They become part of the practice. And I've also seen something else happen where practices that invest in people often turn into places that people want to stay and people don't leave. So, people enjoy growing, they enjoy being challenged, they enjoy that feeling of, accomplishment and feeling successful. So, again, does that guarantee that everyone is going to stay forever? No. But whether they stay, honestly, whether they stay 6 months, a year, 2 years, 20 years, your patients deserve the very best version of that hygienist while they're part of your team. So, and when someone new joins, they're stepping into a department with systems that, again, support success. And that's a much easier place to onboard someone from than starting over every single time.
You just said something really important that we haven't talked about yet. It's also about the patient's experience, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
think of this training not only as training your team members, but the impact that you're going to have on your patients who are also going to want to stay if they feel secure and valued and educated in that same way, no matter who is talking to them in the chair.
Yeah, yeah, you said it. I mean, it's a triple win, right? It's a win for the
Mhm.
patient, most importantly. It's a win for the practice, and it's a win for the hygienist. So, I mean, it's a win all the way around, however you look at
Fantastic. Okay, I think I know your answer to this one, but
it.
which which of these is actually more expensive? Training
Okay.
someone who perhaps inevitably eventually leaves, or paying a premium wage while never building systems that create consistency?
Yeah, I think your guess is the right one, I'm sure. It's the second one by a long shot. Every practice owner knows exactly what payroll costs them, but it's a lot harder, and very few could really get a tangible number for what inconsistency costs them, right? But it's expensive. The patient who leaves without really understanding what they need and why they need it, they typically don't come back for that appointment. It's the fluoride recommendation that never turns into a yes because someone assumes that, because insurance doesn't cover it, they don't need it. It's all of those, those like micro instances that alone are not all that significant. Patient doesn't schedule their next visit because no one really created value around their 6 month continuing care visit. Um, it's all of those hundreds of small moments that happen every single day, and they really compound. So when I walk into offices, I mean, it is so rare that I see or like encounter people who just don't care. I almost always see really, really good people doing the best they can with what they have, right? Different philosophies, different habits, different communication styles, different strengths, different expectations. And that's where again those systems really matter, because they minimize and like reduce the variation. So they help that exceptional patient experience and that really high level of patient care happen more consistently. So yes, someone still may eventually leave, but if you've built a department with strong systems, the next person isn't starting from zero. They're walking into an environment that's already built for success.
I love it. Okay, we've talked about training a lot and these
Hmm.
systems and processes, but when you say training, what does that actually mean? Because I think a lot of doctors may picture, someone coming in for one day, everyone gets excited, but then that excitement can quickly wane, and 6 weeks later, nothing has really changed or been implemented. So, how should they think about that differently?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely, picture that happening, right? People talk about doing something different, you take some notes like, yeah, we're going to do this next week, and then back to status quo, right? The schedule's busy, life happens. We're back to seeing patients and being worried about staying on schedule, and really nothing changed. But, a training should create momentum. It should create behavior change. It should really challenge our thinking. It should create alignment and facilitate, calibration. It should give the team actual tools that they can start using the next day. It should create an action plan that, that clearly lays out, okay, what changes are we committing to? What are we doing tomorrow? What are we doing starting next week? And then, the work has to happen. So one of the things that I appreciate most about our hygiene trainings is that each training builds on the last. So we're not just, like dropping information on a practice and keeping our fingers crossed, hoping that it sticks. We're helping them actually implement and then reinforcing it and then building on it. So when we come back, a couple of months later, we're talking about what changed, also what didn't change, what worked, what didn't work, what were the barriers, what's holding us back from actually putting that into place. We're giving coaching and feedback and really bringing that source of accountability to be the catalyst for kind of long-term improvement. So lasting change doesn't just, happen in one day. It happens through intentional implementation over time.
Wow. It's really the difference between kind of information and just getting information than implementing what you learned,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that for us a little bit more?
I mean, I think what you said is exactly it. It's like there's a difference between just getting information, right? I think about CE courses. Love CE courses. They are really great for getting information, right? But information isn't the thing that actually results in implementation. There has to be something behind it. Most teams, they don't lack information. We're hygienists. Listen, we're like nerds at heart. So we're always reading. We're always we're getting information, but and if that alone created really amazing practices and hygiene departments, then everyone would have them. But it's that implementation is where the gap is, because that requires behaviors to change, new words to come out of my mouth, right, new habits, and asking different questions, all those things. And that's really where the implementation changes the practice. It's practicing and getting better at asking the right questions, getting better at recommending, what the patient actually needs or wants or deserves with confidence. It's getting better at really thinking like the patient and helping create value and kind of bridge that gap between what we know and what they think. So it's all of those things. So again, it's like information is great. We can fill up a whole notepad with all of our great notes, but it's not until we actually put a plan of action into place and do it and execute the plan that we see change.
Yes, the practice has got to practice, right?
Yes. Yeah. 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 You're totally right.
Yeah. Okay, so where do you see the most inconsistency in hygiene departments? Is it around patient diagnosis, education, perhaps periotherapy, scheduling, handoffs in between the office from doctor to team member, team communication, accountability, all of the above?
Yeah. Gosh, I'm like all of them. I mean, if I had to pick just one, I'd say patient communication. It's so different. And this is, again, not just for hygienists. When you're in hygiene school or when you're in dental school, they never teach you how to talk to the patient. They teach you the clinical part, right? They teach you how to do what you need to do, skill wise, and how to document what you're doing, but they never talk about really how to talk to the patient. So every hygienist has a different background and different experiences and different comfort levels and mentors and all of those things. And so I think that that's really where I see the most inconsistency, is that communication piece. And again, I'll say it, if I say it 100 times, it won't be enough. That is why the system matters, right? Patients shouldn't receive like 4 different messages depending on which chair they're sitting in the office. We don't want to create people who, again, it's like we don't want robots. We want people that are on the same page, because being on the same page creates alignment. And when the patient hears, I mean, they could hear the same thing from 4 different people and they hear it in slightly different ways, but the message is the same, right? They've got that like one message, one voice. So that is incredibly important and a huge area of opportunity in almost every office.
Fantastic. That one voice, collective voice
Hmm.
together. I love it.
Yes.
Okay, you've been in over 800 practices, which is almost unfathomable. What do you think
Doesn't feel
about
like
it?
it.
Can,
Time flies when
can,
you're having fun.
Can you think of one practice specifically that might come to mind or is top of mind that really transformed because they improved their systems, not because they hired better or more qualified hygienists or team members?
I can think of a lot of examples. But okay, so one of the practices that comes to mind almost kind of immediately is that, like so many offices, they were really tired. They've got one seasoned kind of hygienist who's been on the team for a long time, a couple of part-time hygienists, still having to use some temps to kind of fill in the gaps. And I want to say even the doctor was even helping with hygiene some weeks. And initially, she kept saying, let's hold off. Let's wait until like we aren't relying on temps. I want to wait until we really build out the team and we feel solid, we're fully staffed. And instead, they made the decision to just go ahead and start then with what they could control and start to improve things. And over the course of, so I guess it was 12 months. So over the course of that year, we worked together on really strengthening the hygiene team and the hygiene department, just like one step at a time. And so, all of those things slowly started to change. Patient education really became more intentional. And it's not that they weren't doing it before. It's just, again, goes back to patient communication and speaking the patient's language. It really helps create that value and allows the patient to see that value. Team is more confident at just telling the patient, what they need, regardless of whether or not it costs money, regardless of whether or not they have insurance or no insurance, or insurance is going to cover it 100% or only 80%. Everyone, really aligned around that care philosophy and that standard of care that they created, instead of everyone doing things just a little bit differently. And it just made a huge change. I mean, the two teams, the business team and the clinical team, were communicating better, like working more cohesively. Their patient retention, we were tracking patient retention, and that improved, I want to say 18%. Doctors were getting those like predictable, consistent handoffs. So it's hard for me to say, like, there wasn't one, moment of magic, and it wasn't, oh, they got this one person or these two people and their hygiene team was perfect and that's what did it. It was just those commitments, those small commitments happening, over time, again and again, that completely changed things for that team and that department.
What is one system that almost every practice believes that they have, but they actually don't?
Accountability. And I mentioned this before, but I really think that accountability is so misunderstood. People hear that word and their mind immediately goes to, oh, who's in trouble, right? That's not what accountability is. Accountability is clarity. It's everyone understanding what's expected, those clear expectations. It's also measuring whether or not we're doing it. How do we know, if we're not tracking things, if we aren't monitoring metrics, how do we know whether or not we're improving? How do we know whether or not like we've arrived, right? We've met the goal. So, it's all of those things. It's accountability is celebrating, right? Celebrating our progress because we're measuring it and we know that we've gotten there. It's communicating, it's coaching someone when something isn't working. So, the healthiest practices that I've been into, they aren't constantly criticizing people. They're constantly helping people grow, right? They're helping people get better at what they do. And that is a completely different feeling. So yeah, I feel like everyone should, we gotta like redefine that word accountability, because again, it's just everyone cringes when you say that word.
A brilliant reframe and a brilliant way to explain all of the different ways that accountability can show up. Not so much you're in trouble, right? It's how even do we
Yes.
celebrate people? How do we see how far we've come because we're tracking things? I mean, just fantastic. I love that. If every practice owner listening right now implemented one change next Monday, what would something be that they could easily take away, and what would you recommend for them?
I would bring your hygiene team together, bring your hygiene team together and ask if a patient saw every, not just hygienist, but provider in this practice over the next month, would they receive the same experience? Would they hear the same message? Would they get the same recommendations? Would they receive the same philosophy? Would they leave feeling like the visit was like they got value, like they had a relationship with us, they understood why they needed to come back or why they needed to get the treatment that was recommended? If the answer is not like an immediate, like, oh, of course, right? Yes. First, don't be discouraged because more often than not, that's not the answer. But, you have just identified like the biggest opportunity then, right? So you don't have to start by, flipping everything on its head and changing everything, but, picking one area. Maybe it's conversations around perio. Maybe it's, hey, we're going to really lean into and focus on patient education or handoffs or, figuring out how to reduce the cancellations that we're getting and focus on and improve that one system, get really good at it, and then just move to the next one and build on the next one. That's really how exceptional, successful hygiene departments are created. One thing, one intentional thing at a time.
Yeah, it sounds like the first step to accountability to me is understanding where we're at, right? In order to
Yeah.
improve, right? We're uncovering and we're getting the clarity about where we're at in order to continue to grow and continue to improve. Um,
Yes.
what's one message that you hope every doctor listening remembers after today's conversation?
I'd love for them to remember, that the where we started actually this conversation. The perfect hygiene team is not coming. And honestly, that is okay because your future, right? The practice's trajectory shouldn't depend on finding the perfect person or the perfect people. It should depend on, building a practice, building departments, building teams where people can succeed, because there's always going to be something, it never fails. Like I said, some really amazing teams, someone, it's time for them to retire, somebody moves, someone wants to cut back their hours because of the phase of life they're in, someone decides it's time for me to do something different, I'm getting out of this and I want to pursue a different career path. And that's just part of it. So the practices that keep on growing aren't the ones that avoid change and try and force things to stay exactly the same. They're the ones that just build systems strong enough to perform through that change, right? Like resiliency, I guess is the word I'm trying to think of. Like they're the ones that build those systems, those expectations, that accountability that is resilient enough to make it through all of those changes.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't stay the same and grow at the same time.
Yes.
That is
Yeah.
literally
You cannot.
staying the same is the opposite of growth,
Yes.
actually.
So true. Yes.
Amazing, Jaclyn. Thank you so much. Incredible insight. So happy to
Mm,
have you back for
thank
this
you.
conversation today.
Thank you, Jamie. It was a pleasure.
All right. One final thought. Like Jaclyn said, the perfect hygiene team isn't coming to save you. There will always be people who retire, people who move, people who reduce their hours, people who will just choose a different path. And that's not failure. That's simply a part of running a business or running a practice. The practices that continue to grow aren't the ones who somehow avoid change. Like we just said, those things are inherently opposites, but they're the ones that build systems and continue performing through that change. They coach, they train, they create accountability, they establish clear expectations, they invest in implementation, not just information. Because the goal was never to find the perfect hygiene team. The goal was to build that kind of hygiene department where every provider can succeed because the systems around them support success. So if today's conversation challenged the way you think about your hygiene department, share it with another practice owner who could benefit from hearing it too. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Private Practice Playbook.